I swear, the day it all changed started like any other. Just me, a mop, and the cold, soulless hallways of Grayson Enterprises. I wasn't anyone important. Hell, most days, no one even noticed I was there. But that morning, something felt off. The elevator doors snapped open with a mechanical ding, and before I could move, a man in a crisp navy suit stormed out, shouting into his phone. Papers flew everywhere. Coffee spilled onto the marble floor. No one helped him. They just watched. Like vultures. I didn't even think. Dropped the mop. Ran over. "Sir, here, let me help," I said, already gathering the papers. The guy looked at me like I was some sort of alien. A janitor. Offering to help the CFO of the company. But for a split second, his expression cracked, not arrogance, but exhaustion. Pure, bone-deep weariness. "Thanks," he muttered, almost too low to hear. I handed him the last sheet, coffee stains and all. "Rough day?" I asked, wiping the floor as best I could with my already grimy rag. He barked a short, bitter laugh. "You have no idea." He was about to leave. He had places to be, meetings to command, money to move, but he paused. Turned back to me. "What's your name?" he asked. I blinked. No one ever asked my name. "Jason. Jason Miller." He nodded almost thoughtfully. "Thanks, Jason. You saved my ass today." I didn't think anything of it. I went back to mopping, same as always. Invisible. But that one tiny moment, that stupid, simple act of kindness, it was the first domino in a chain reaction that would tear my entire life apart. And rebuild it into something I never dared dream. For a few days after that, life stayed the same. I showed up at 5:30 every morning, keys jangling at my side, the smell of bleach clinging to my clothes like a second skin. I'd nod at the security guard, punch in on the battered time clock, and start my endless routine, empty trash cans, mop the endless floors, scrub away the evidence of 1,000 lives more important than mine. If I was lucky, I got a tired smile from the receptionist. If I wasn't, I got ignored completely. But then something shifted. It was a Thursday. I remember because the cafeteria always served meatloaf on Thursdays and the smell hung in the air like a bad memory. I was wiping down the windows in conference room B, the big one, the one with the view of the city skyline, when the door creaked open behind me. I turned, expecting to see a stressed-out secretary or a grumpy executive. Instead, it was him. The man from the elevator. He wasn't yelling into a phone this time. He looked different. Calmer. He carried 2 coffee cups in a tray and an awkward, almost embarrassed smile on his face. "Jason, right?" he said, stepping inside like he didn't care that his $2,000 suit was brushing against bleach-streaked walls. "Got you a coffee?" I froze, my hands still pressed against the glass. No one had ever brought me coffee. Not here. Not anywhere. Thanks," I stammered, wiping my palms on my janitor's uniform before taking the cup. It was warm. Real. Heavy in my hand. He leaned against the long mahogany table and sipped his own cup. "You saved that investor package last week," he said. "If those documents hadn't made it to the meeting in time, it would have cost the company millions." I blinked at him. "I just picked up some papers." He smiled, but it wasn't patronizing. It was respectful. Like he saw something in me I couldn't even see in myself. "Sometimes it's the small things that change everything," he said. "I'm Aaron, by the way. Aaron Grayson." My heart just about stopped. Grayson. As in Grayson Enterprises. As in the company's founder's son. I muttered something stupid like, "Nice to meet you," and tried not to spill coffee all over the expensive carpet. But Aaron just laughed and clapped me on the shoulder like we were old buddies. "You got a minute?" he asked. "I want to show you something." I should have said no. I had floors to mop, toilets to clean, supervisors breathing down my neck. But something in his voice, that rare kindness, that curiosity made it impossible. I followed him down winding hallways, past rooms I'd only ever glimpsed through half-open doors. He led me to a corner office, smaller than the main one, but still bigger than any space I'd ever had to myself. "This one's empty," he said, tossing the keys on the sleek glass desk. "We're expanding operations. New department. Logistics coordination. Entry-level management." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. A janitor in a suit? Running a department? But Aaron wasn't laughing. "You're smart," he said simply. "You notice things. You act when others don't. That's the kind of person we need." My hands shook around the coffee cup. "I don't have a degree. I don't even have, my resume's a joke." Aaron shrugged. "You have heart. I can teach you the rest." For the first time in years, I felt a crack in the thick, gray wall around me. Hope. Tiny, fragile, terrifying. "You're offering me a job?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "No," he said, grinning. "I'm offering you a future." I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there on my creaky mattress, staring up at the cracked ceiling of my tiny studio apartment, my mind spinning faster than it had in years. Could this be real? Was Aaron serious? Or was it some cruel joke, another corporate guy getting his kicks by dangling false hope in front of the janitor? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that office. That empty desk. That shiny keyring. I thought about my father, how he'd spent his whole life scrubbing floors and fixing broken pipes, telling me with a sad smile that some people are just meant to serve. I thought about my mother's tired face, the way she used to clip coupons and pray the rent check wouldn't bounce. I thought about every time someone looked right through me like I wasn't even there. And for the first time, I let myself imagine something more. The next morning, I showed up to work at 5 o'clock, a full 30 minutes early. My uniform felt heavier somehow, like it was clinging to a version of me I was about to leave behind. I kept my head down, worked fast, barely even noticed the usual stares and smirks from the executives. But right before noon, as I was polishing the metal letters of the main directory board, Aaron appeared again. He wasn't in a suit today. He wore jeans and a blazer, like some startup guy ready to change the world. "You ready?" he asked, tossing me a folder. My hands shook as I caught it. Inside were forms, tax documents, onboarding paperwork, a rough outline of the new department's goals. My name was printed in bold letters at the top, Jason Miller, Junior Operations Manager. I could hardly breathe. "Aaron, I don't even know where to start." He clapped me on the back again, a little rougher this time. "You start by walking through that door like you belong here," he said. "Because you do." I filled out the forms in the tiny maintenance closet that had been my break room for the past 2 years. As I scribbled my name on the lines, something inside me shifted. Maybe I wasn't just the janitor. Maybe, just maybe, I was something more. The first few weeks were brutal. I barely knew how to use the email system. Half the time I sat in meetings feeling like I was drowning in acronyms and buzzwords I didn't understand. I made mistakes. God, did I make mistakes? I sent reports to the wrong departments. I miscalculated inventory numbers. I got chewed out by senior managers who didn't care where I came from, only that I wasn't moving fast enough. But every time I thought about quitting, about going back to the mop and the bucket, Aaron would show up. Sometimes it was just a quick thumbs up across a crowded conference room. Sometimes it was a late-night email, "You're doing better than you think." Every small gesture, every tiny vote of confidence stitched me back together. And little by little, I got better. I stayed late. I came in early. I asked questions even when they made me look stupid. I read everything I could get my hands on: business books, management manuals, training guides left behind in conference rooms. I learned. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But it was mine. 6 months in, I barely recognized the guy staring back at me from the bathroom mirror. The worn janitor's uniform had been replaced by pressed slacks and a button-down shirt. I'd even splurged on a decent tie, navy blue with tiny white stripes, conservative but confident, the way the department heads seemed to like it. My calloused hands still gave me away, rough and scarred from years of scrubbing floors and hauling garbage, but my eyes were different. They didn't look tired anymore. They looked alive. It wasn't just about the paycheck, though that had changed too. My first real salary, not hourly, not under the table, but a solid number I could actually plan around, was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I moved out of my dingy apartment and into a modest one-bedroom in a better part of town. I bought a used car that didn't stall at every red light. I started sending money to my parents, paying off debts they hadn't even told me about because they were too ashamed. But more than that, I walked differently. Talked differently. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. Still, the ghosts of who I'd been clung to me. I never forgot the feeling of those cold, lonely mornings with nothing but a mop for company. I never forgot how it felt to be overlooked, underestimated, written off. That memory was branded into me, and I promised myself I would never become the kind of man who stepped over the people who kept the wheels turning. That promise was tested sooner than I expected. It happened one evening when the building was half empty and the cleaning crew was just starting their shift. I was staying late, buried in quarterly reports, when I heard a crash down the hall. I poked my head out and saw one of the new janitors, a young guy, couldn't have been more than 20, desperately trying to gather a tray of broken glass he'd dropped. His hands were trembling. A couple of executives walked past, sneering, whispering behind their hands like high school bullies. Something inside me snapped. I stood up, straightened my tie, and walked over. "Hey," I said, crouching down beside him. "You okay?" He looked at me like he expected to get yelled at, maybe even fired. His mouth opened and closed, words stuck behind his fear. "It's just glass," I said, helping him pick up the pieces carefully. "No big deal." The executives paused, confused. Here was a manager on his knees helping the janitor? One of them muttered something under his breath, but I didn't care. I remembered how it felt to be him. Scared. Alone. Disposable. After we finished cleaning, I gave him a pat on the back. Accidents happen, I said. Don't beat yourself up. The kid's eyes shone with gratitude so raw it nearly broke me. That night, driving home under a velvet black sky, I realized something. Success didn't mean forgetting where you came from. It meant remembering every damn day and using whatever power you had to make the climb easier for the next guy. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. A year passed, and with it came storms I hadn't expected. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Promotions, bonuses, handshakes from the executives who used to glance right past me. I was now the official operations manager for the entire logistics division, managing a team of 25. I had a company credit card, a corner cubicle with a window, and a shiny plaque with my name etched into it. People who once sneered at me now called me sir. Some even pretended we had always been friends. But success, I learned, came with shadows. Whispers started following me down the hallways, jealous voices questioning how some janitor had climbed so fast. Emails got lost. Meetings were scheduled without me. Every mistake I made, no matter how small, was magnified under a microscope, dissected, used against me. I wasn't just fighting to prove I belonged anymore. I was fighting to survive. The hardest betrayal came from someone I thought was my friend. Dylan, a mid-level manager, had been one of the few who treated me kindly at first. We grabbed beers after work, joked about how clueless the top brass could be. I trusted him, told him things I should have kept close to my chest. And when a senior director position opened up, I naively mentioned to Dylan that I was thinking of applying. He smiled, clapped me on the shoulder, and told me to go for it. 2 days later, I found out he had submitted an anonymous letter to HR questioning my qualifications, dredging up my janitor past like it was some dirty secret. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. For hours, I sat alone in my car in the parking garage, staring at the concrete walls, trying to hold back the anger, the humiliation. I wanted to quit. I wanted to drive away from that building and never look back. But then I remembered Aaron's words, "You belong here." I remembered the kid with the broken glass, the janitors still scrubbing the floors after midnight, the ones who would never be seen unless someone like me fought to be seen first. So I fought. I didn't retaliate against Dylan. I didn't stoop to gossip or revenge. Instead, I buried myself in work. I made my department run so efficiently that even the harshest critics had to admit it. I volunteered for projects no one wanted. I showed up early to every meeting, prepared down to the last spreadsheet. I built alliances, real ones, with people who cared more about results than resumes. And slowly, painfully, the tide turned. When the senior director promotion was finally announced 6 months later, my name was at the top of the list. Not because of pity. Not because of a favor. Because I had earned it. At the ceremony, standing in front of hundreds of employees, I took the microphone, my palms sweating, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear myself think. I looked out at the crowd, executives, managers, janitors, and I told them the truth. I told them I had started in this very building with nothing but a mop and a minimum wage paycheck. I told them I had failed and gotten back up and failed again. I told them that kindness, grit, and loyalty meant more than titles or degrees. And when I finished, the room was silent for a beat that felt like forever. Then they stood. They clapped. Not because I was perfect, but because I was real. That night, sitting on the hood of my car under a sky littered with stars, I finally let myself believe it. I hadn't just changed my life. I had changed the rules. With the new title came new responsibilities, bigger projects, higher stakes, and a team that stretched across multiple states. I was flying out to meetings now, shaking hands with partners in cities I'd only ever seen on TV. Dallas, Chicago, New York. My name appeared on press releases, my signature authorized 6-figure deals, and sometimes, when I caught my reflection in the shiny, mirrored windows of skyscrapers, I hardly recognized the man looking back. But no matter how high I climbed, I never let myself forget. Every time I boarded a plane in a tailored suit, I thought about how I used to scrub bathrooms in that same cheap uniform. Every time I sat in a conference room full of polished executives, I remembered what it felt like to be invisible. It would have been easy to get lost in it all. To start believing I was better than the people who kept the lights on, the people who mopped the floors after everyone else went home. I saw it happen around me, good people turning cold and ruthless once they hit a certain level, forgetting the hands that had helped them climb. I promised myself that would never be me. And it wasn't just a quiet promise. I made it my mission to change the culture around me. When I needed to hire new managers, I didn't just look at resumes stacked with Ivy League degrees. I looked for heart. For hustle. For the ones who stayed late to help their teams, who saw the people behind the titles. Some of the old guard hated me for it. They whispered that I was too soft, too sentimental, that I was lowering standards. But I didn't care. I knew the truth. Real strength wasn't built on stepping over others. It was built on lifting them up. One afternoon, about 2 years after my first big promotion, something happened that made everything worth it. I was walking through the lobby, heading for a meeting, when I saw an older man struggling to carry a crate of bottled water across the floor. His back was bent, his face red with effort. People passed him without a second glance, too busy, too important to bother. Without thinking, I jogged over and grabbed one side of the crate. "Let me help you with that," I said. The man looked startled, then grateful. We carried it together to the storage closet near the reception desk, and as I set it down, he squinted at me. "Aren't you one of the big shots now?" he asked, half joking. I laughed. "Maybe. But I'm never too big to lend a hand." He smiled, a slow, genuine smile, and patted my shoulder. "World needs more people like you, kid." I walked away from that closet feeling lighter than I had in months. Later that day, Aaron called me into his office. It had been a while since we'd talked properly. He was even busier than I was, pulled in 1,000 directions as the company grew. But he still found time. "You're making a difference here, Jason," he said, folding his hands on the desk. "People notice. And not just the board. Everyone." I didn't know what to say. Praise still sat awkwardly on my shoulders like a coat that didn't quite fit. Aaron grinned. "Keep going. Don't lose that fire. Don't lose who you are." And I swore to myself right then, I never would. The seasons turned, years passed, and Grayson Enterprises grew into something bigger than any of us had imagined. New branches opened, new markets exploded, and I was right in the thick of it, overseeing operations across the West Coast, managing teams of hundreds, negotiating deals that made the evening news. My salary soared higher than I ever dreamed it could. I moved into a comfortable house in the suburbs, bought a reliable truck, and even managed to take a real vacation for the first time in my life. But with every new success, a question gnawed at the back of my mind: was I still the same Jason who mopped floors and lived paycheck to paycheck? Sometimes, late at night, I would sit on my back porch, listening to the crickets, and wonder if I had somehow betrayed the kid I used to be. That fear came to a head one rainy Thursday evening when I received an invitation to the company's annual gala, a black tie affair held in a glittering downtown ballroom. I had been to these events before, but this time was different. This time, I wasn't just attending, I was being honored. Employee of the Decade, the invitation said in embossed gold letters. Me. A janitor turned executive. It felt surreal, almost laughable. Part of me wanted to decline, to avoid the spotlight, to hide. But another part, the part that had fought tooth and nail for every inch of progress, told me I had earned this. Not just for myself, but for every unseen worker who had ever dreamed of something more. I spent hours preparing that night, tying and readying my tie, polishing my shoes until they shone like mirrors. As I walked into the ballroom, heads turned. People smiled and nodded. Some clapped me on the back. But it wasn't their approval I cared about. It was the janitorial staff at the back of the room, setting out hors d'oeuvres and refilling drinks, who caught my eye. They wore the same uniforms I used to wear, carried the same invisible weight I knew too well. And I made sure to stop, to shake hands, to say thank you like I meant it, because I did. When my name was called and I climbed the steps to the stage, I felt a lump rise in my throat. The CEO handed me the award, a sleek glass trophy that sparkled under the chandelier lights. Cameras flashed. Applause thundered. I gripped the microphone with shaking hands and looked out over the sea of faces. "I wasn't supposed to be here," I said, my voice rough with emotion. At least, that's what the world told me. I was supposed to stay in the shadows. I was supposed to keep my head down, keep mopping, keep dreaming small. But someone gave me a chance. And I fought like hell not to waste it. The room was silent, hanging on every word. "I'm proud of what I've achieved," I continued. "But I'm even prouder that I never forgot who I was. Or where I came from. Success isn't about titles or money. It's about heart. It's about lifting others as you climb." The applause that followed wasn't polite or perfunctory. It was real. Raw. I stepped down from the stage with my head held high, not because I had become someone new, but because I had stayed true to who I had always been. That night, driving home with the trophy on the passenger seat, rain tapping gently against the windshield, I smiled to myself for the first time in a long while, a deep, soul-deep smile. I hadn't just survived. I had become. After the gala, life didn't magically become easier. The higher you climb, the thinner the air gets, and the more people are waiting for you to fall. There were days I questioned if I had made the right choices, days when the weight of responsibility pressed down on me so hard I could barely breathe. Mistakes still happened, shipments delayed, contracts lost, employees quitting when I needed them most. And every failure, no matter how small, felt personal. Like a crack forming at the base of everything I had built. But through it all, I held on to one truth: resilience isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up every damn time you do. One Monday morning, disaster struck. A major supplier botched an order worth millions. Trucks sat empty at the loading docks, customers were furious, and I could feel the panic ripple through my team like electricity. My phone rang nonstop, angry calls, desperate emails, the executive board demanding answers. In the middle of the chaos, one of my newer employees, a kid named Marcus who reminded me so much of myself it hurt, came into my office, pale and shaking. "I think I messed up," he said, voice cracking. He was the one who had double-checked the order forms. His mistake, buried under layers of bureaucracy, had helped cause the disaster. For a split second, anger flared hot in my chest. It would have been so easy to rip into him, to vent all the pressure and fear onto the nearest target. But I remembered being him, standing terrified in a cheap uniform, bracing for the hammer to fall. I took a slow breath. "Sit down, Marcus," I said, my voice steady. "Let's figure this out." Together, we stayed until midnight fixing the mess. Calling vendors. Pulling in favors. Organizing emergency shipments. By morning, we had salvaged enough to keep the company's head above water. Marcus was exhausted, ashamed, and ready to quit. But I didn't let him. "You're better than one mistake," I told him, clapping him on the shoulder. "I know, because I was you." The gratitude in his eyes was something I would never forget. And the next month, Marcus led a project that saved the company twice the amount we'd almost lost. All because someone gave him a second chance when he needed it most. Moments like that kept me grounded. Reminded me why I fought so hard, not just to succeed, but to matter. To make sure that the path behind me was a little smoother for those who came next. I wasn't just managing operations anymore. I was building something bigger, a culture, a legacy, a living, breathing example that kindness and strength could coexist. And in the quiet moments, when the office lights dimmed and the city hummed softly outside my window, I knew something with absolute certainty. No amount of money, no title, no accolade could ever be as valuable as keeping my humanity intact. Because at the end of the day, when the trophies gather dust and the applause fades away, all we really have is who we chose to be when no one was looking. And I had chosen well. Time, relentless as ever, kept moving forward. Before I realized it, nearly 5 years had passed since that rainy night when Aaron Grayson had handed me a second chance and changed the entire trajectory of my life. Grayson Enterprises had doubled in size, our name lighting up the skyline alongside giants we used to chase. My own life was almost unrecognizable, a far cry from the boy who could barely afford a broken-down car and a bag of dollar store groceries. Yet, despite the bigger salary, the nicer suits, and the polished office with floor-to-ceiling windows, I still carried the weight of who I had been tucked deep in my chest, like a scar that never fully healed but reminded you why you fought so hard to live. Aaron and I stayed close, though our conversations changed. We no longer talked about climbing the ladder, we talked about building ladders for others. About creating a company where nobody felt invisible. About daring to believe that good people could still rise without selling their souls. I learned that Aaron had his own scars, his own battles fought in boardrooms and behind closed doors, struggling to prove to the old guard that decency wasn't a weakness. We became allies in that quiet, stubborn war, a janitor and a billionaire's son fighting for something bigger than both of us. One afternoon, during a quarterly town hall, Aaron surprised me. He stood on the stage in front of hundreds of employees, from senior executives to maintenance staff, and began telling my story. How he had met me as a janitor. How one act of simple kindness had sparked a chain reaction neither of us could have foreseen. I sat frozen in my seat, my heart hammering against my ribs as he spoke about resilience, loyalty, and heart. "We can teach skills," Aaron said, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium. "We can train processes. But we can't teach character. Jason Miller is proof that the right heart in the right hands can change everything." When he finished, the applause was deafening. I didn't know where to look, didn't know how to sit there while a sea of faces turned toward me with something new in their eyes, not pity, not skepticism, but respect. Afterwards, as I stood awkwardly near the refreshment table, dozens of people came up to shake my hand. Secretaries, interns, managers, custodians. Some shared their own stories, battles they were still fighting, dreams they were too scared to speak aloud. I listened to every one, feeling their words stitch themselves into the fabric of my soul. Later that night, alone in my office, I stared out at the city's glittering lights. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Marcus, now one of my most trusted team leads. Just wanted to say thanks, he said, shifting awkwardly in the doorway. Not just for earlier. For, you know, everything. I smiled genuinely. Don't thank me, Marcus. Just pass it on. Because that was the real reward, wasn't it? Not the paycheck. Not the title. Not even the recognition. It was the chance to be the kind of person who turned around, reached out a hand, and said, you can do it too. It was the kind of wealth no money could ever buy. Weeks after the town hall, something unexpected happened that shook me more than any promotion or award ever could. I received an email from the Grayson Foundation, the company's philanthropic arm, something I had always admired from a distance but never imagined being a part of. The message was short and to the point. They were creating a new initiative focused on providing educational and career advancement opportunities for support staff across all Grayson locations, and they wanted me to lead it. Me, the former janitor, the man who once mopped these same hallways in silence. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, my chest tight, my mind racing with doubts. Was I ready for this? Was I worthy? Could I carry the dreams of hundreds, maybe thousands, on my shoulders without letting them down? The fear was real. But so was the fire burning in my gut. This was more than a job offer. This was destiny knocking at my door, daring me to step through. I clicked accept without a second thought. The months that followed were some of the most challenging of my life. I wasn't just dealing with budgets and schedules anymore, I was dealing with lives. I met janitors who had given up believing they could ever be more. Cafeteria workers who dreamed of running kitchens. Security guards who dreamed of running teams. Every story I heard was a mirror of the one I used to live, full of quiet hope and invisible battles. And every day I carried those dreams with me like sacred promises. I fought for funding. I fought executives who didn't see the point. I fought the slow, grinding wheels of bureaucracy that tried to smother change under piles of paperwork. I fought and I bled and I gave pieces of my soul away because I knew what was at stake. And little by little, the walls started to crack. The first scholarship recipients were announced at a small ceremony in the main lobby. No fancy stage, no glittering chandeliers, just folding chairs and heartfelt words. I watched as men and women in work boots and scrubs stepped forward to receive their certificates, their faces glowing with pride and disbelief. Some cried openly. Others stood stiffly, trying to hide the emotions that threatened to break them apart. When my turn came to speak, I didn't bother with a prepared speech. I just spoke from the only place that ever mattered, my heart. I know what it feels like to be unseen, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I know what it feels like to believe that your dreams are too small, too impossible. But you're not invisible. Your dreams matter. You matter. There wasn't a dry eye in the house when I finished. That night, sitting at home on my porch with a cold beer in hand and the cool night air wrapping around me, I realized something profound. I hadn't just changed my own life. I had become a bridge for others to cross over. And no matter where my career went from here, no matter how high or how far, this was the work that would define me. It wasn't about chasing titles anymore. It was about chasing meaning. And I had found it. Or maybe it had found me. The more involved I became with the Grayson Foundation's initiative, the more I understood just how deep the roots of hopelessness could run. Some of the employees we reached out to didn't even dare to apply for the programs we offered. They thought it was a trick, some cruel joke, a setup to expose them as foolish for wanting more. I recognized that fear too well. I saw it in their lowered eyes, in the way they clutched their cleaning supplies or cafeteria trays like shields. And every time, it broke my heart a little more. Because if someone hadn't once seen past my own fear, hadn't once believed in me when I couldn't, I would still be stuck in that same invisible life, convinced that better things were meant for someone else. I started holding small meetings, no pressure, no suits, just honest conversations in the break rooms and lunch areas. I shared my story, not to brag, but to show them that dreams weren't just for the rich or the lucky. I told them about every time I had almost quit, about the nights I cried alone wondering if I was enough, about the fear that never truly went away even when success came. I watched their faces change, walls crumbling, hope flickering back into tired eyes. It wasn't fast. It wasn't easy. But slowly, people began to believe. They started signing up for classes, started shadowing managers, started imagining a future that didn't end with punching a clock and cleaning up after people who never bothered to learn their names. And as they grew, so did I. Leading the initiative didn't just fulfill me. It transformed me. I became sharper, wiser, more compassionate. I learned how to listen better, how to fight smarter, how to lead not from a pedestal, but from the trenches, shoulder to shoulder with the people who needed me most. And through it all, I held on to the one rule that had carried me from the janitor's closet to the executive boardroom. Never, ever forget where you came from. There were moments, of course, when doubt crept back in. Nights when I wondered if I was doing enough, if I was reaching the ones who needed it most, if it would all fall apart the moment I wasn't there to push it forward. But then, inevitably, something would happen. A shy janitor would pass their first management course. A single mom working the night shift would get promoted to supervisor, and I would remember why the fight was worth every drop of blood and sweat. One evening, as I was locking up after a foundation meeting, Aaron caught me in the hallway. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then said quietly, "You've done something here, Jason, something that's going to outlive both of us." I swallowed hard, emotions thick in my throat. "I'm proud of you," he added. No promotion, no bonus, no title had ever meant as much as those 4 words. Driving home that night, city lights blurring in my windshield, I realized something even deeper. I hadn't just found success. I had found purpose. And that was a treasure no one could ever take from me. Months rolled on, and the ripple effects of what we had built at Grayson Enterprises became impossible to ignore. Productivity climbed, but so did something harder to measure. Loyalty, pride, a sense of belonging that spread like quiet wildfire through the walls of the company. Departments that had once felt cold and mechanical now buzzed with a strange, powerful energy. Employees who had once kept their heads down now spoke up, offering ideas, solving problems, taking ownership. It wasn't just the janitors and kitchen staff who changed, it was everyone. When you lift up the people at the bottom, it lifts everyone above them too. I saw it with my own eyes. I lived it every day. Still, not everyone was happy about the shift. Some old guard executives grumbled behind closed doors, resenting the attention being given to what they saw as the little people. They said we were wasting money, diluting standards, setting dangerous precedents. They didn't say it to my face, not often, but the tension was always there, simmering just below the surface. There were meetings where I felt every eye in the room silently daring me to fail, to give them an excuse to dismantle everything we had built. And sometimes the pressure nearly crushed me. But every time doubt crept in, every time fear whispered that maybe I was reaching too far, I remembered the promises I had made, not just to myself, but to every scared, unseen worker who had ever dared to dream of something better. I owed them more than cowardice. I owed them everything. One particular afternoon stands out sharper than the rest. I was reviewing quarterly reports when a knock came at my office door. It was Carla, one of the custodians. She was in her 60s, tough as nails, with hands roughened by a lifetime of hard work. She never said much, polite hellos, quiet nods. But today she stepped inside, clutching something small and crumpled in her weathered hands. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, voice trembling slightly. Before I could respond, she pressed the crumpled object into my hand and hurried away, almost embarrassed. I opened it slowly. It was a handwritten note written in shaky cursive. "Because of you, I went back to school. I'm graduating next month. My grandson will be there. Thank you for making me believe I was still worth it." I sat back in my chair, the weight of those words crashing over me like a tidal wave. It was one thing to set policies and build programs. It was another thing entirely to realize you had helped change someone's story, not through grand speeches or lofty promises, but through small, stubborn acts of faith. I pinned Carla's note on the corkboard behind my desk where I could see it every single day. Because titles fade. Offices get reassigned. Companies rise and fall. But what we build inside each other, that stays. That's the real legacy. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. I was ready for it, whatever it held. As the seasons changed outside the tall glass windows of my office, so too did the seasons of my life. Opportunities one never dared to imagine kept arriving: invitations to speak at conferences, requests for interviews, offers from other corporations waving promises of bigger paychecks and flashier titles. It would have been easy to chase the next big thing, to keep climbing higher and higher until I lost sight of the ground completely. But every time I sat across a polished boardroom table or skimmed a glossy contract, I asked myself one simple question: would this help me stay true to who I am? And if the answer was even slightly uncertain, I walked away. Because no dollar amount, no prestige, was worth selling the soul that had carried me this far. Still, there was one offer I couldn't ignore. The board of Grayson Enterprises asked me to step into an even higher role, Chief Operations Officer, a position that would put me second only to the CEO himself. It was the kind of job people spent their entire lives chasing, and I knew what it meant. Longer hours, more scrutiny, heavier burdens. It wasn't just a promotion. It was a life change. I wrestled with the decision for weeks, talking it through with Aaron, with my parents, even with the mentors and friends I had picked up along the way. Everyone had advice, but deep down, I knew the answer had to come from me alone. One night, long after sunset, I drove back to where it had all begun, the old Grayson headquarters, the original building before we had expanded into shiny new campuses. It was mostly abandoned now, set to be torn down within the year, but as I stood outside the chain-link fence, memories flooded me, the endless hours mopping floors, the dreams too fragile to speak aloud, the lonely ache of being invisible. I closed my eyes and breathed it all in, the struggle, the pain, the raw, aching beauty of it. I whispered a silent promise to the kid I used to be, I won't forget you. I won't leave you behind. When I opened my eyes, the decision was clear. I would take the COO role, but on my terms. I would lead with compassion, with grit, with the unshakable belief that a company's true strength was measured not by the gloss of its advertisements but by the integrity of its people. I would build an empire of kindness, brick by brick if I had to. The announcement went public a week later. Headlines buzzed, from janitor to COO, Jason Miller's unbelievable rise. I smiled when I saw the articles, but I didn't let them get to my head. They didn't know the whole story. They didn't know about the late nights, the fear, the failures, the stubborn hope that refused to die no matter how many times the world tried to snuff it out. Only I knew the real journey. And as I stood on the rooftop of the new headquarters looking out over the city that had once swallowed me whole, I realized something that made my chest swell with pride. I hadn't just climbed the ladder. I had rebuilt it. Stronger. Wiser. Kinder. And I wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The early days as COO were a whirlwind. Overnight, my calendar exploded with back-to-back meetings, strategic planning sessions, quarterly reviews, and endless calls with investors and partners from all corners of the country. My responsibilities stretched across divisions I barely understood at first: finance, marketing, product development, and every day was a tightrope walk between confidence and sheer, unrelenting doubt. But if there was one thing the mop had taught me all those years ago, it was endurance. I showed up early. I stayed late. I listened more than I spoke. And slowly, one day at a time, I earned the trust of those who had doubted me. Not by being the loudest voice in the room, but by being the one who never gave up. Despite the pressure, I refused to let the new title change the core of who I was. I made it a point to walk the floors of every department at least once a week, not with an entourage, not with a clipboard, but as a human being. I stopped to talk with interns and custodians and junior associates, asking about their families, their dreams, their struggles. I made it clear that my door was open, not just to the executives but to anyone brave enough to knock. And slowly, impossibly, the culture began to shift. People started to believe that kindness wasn't just tolerated here, it was expected. It was valued. But success, real success, is never without its storms. About a year into my new role, Grayson Enterprises hit a rough patch. A major acquisition fell through, stock prices wobbled, and suddenly all eyes turned toward me. I was the new guy at the top, the easiest scapegoat if things went wrong. Rumors started swirling. Whispers about whether the janitor was in over his head. Anonymous emails filled with doubt and derision circulated like poison through the executive ranks. One evening, after an especially brutal board meeting, I sat alone in my office, staring at the city lights and wondering if they were right. Maybe I had risen too fast. Maybe I didn't belong here after all. The fear clawed at my chest, old and familiar. The kind that once told me to keep my head down, to know my place. But then I thought of Marcus. I thought of Carla. I thought of the hundreds of employees who had found new hope because someone like me had dared to believe in them first. And I remembered I wasn't here because I was flawless. I was here because I never stopped fighting. The next morning, I called an emergency town hall. No scripts, no pure spin, no executive speeches. Just me standing under the harsh fluorescent lights, speaking to every single person who made the company run, from the cleaning crews to the marketing analysts to the C-suite execs. I told them the truth. About the challenges we faced. About the mistakes we had made. About the hard road ahead. But I also told them about who we were. About the grit, the resilience, the humanity that had always been our true foundation. And I promised them that we wouldn't lose it, not now, not ever. When I finished, the room was silent. Then, slowly, one by one, people started clapping. Not polite, corporate applause. Real, thunderous, soul-deep clapping that rattled the walls. We weathered the storm. Together. And in the process, we built something stronger than quarterly earnings or stock prices. We built a family. The months that followed were some of the hardest and most beautiful of my life. Our company didn't just recover, it transformed. We became leaner, smarter, more unified. Departments that had once operated like isolated kingdoms now collaborated like living, breathing parts of a single organism. It wasn't easy. Every step forward felt like a battle against the old ways, the old fears. But the people believed in what we were building because they could see it, touch it, feel it in the way their managers spoke to them, in the way opportunities opened that had once been closed. The greatest victories weren't found in the headlines or the stock charts. They were found in the small, quiet moments: a cafeteria worker getting promoted to team lead, a security guard enrolling in business classes funded by the company, a single mother celebrating her first-ever salary position after years of cleaning bathrooms no one else wanted to think about. And through it all, I stayed the same man. I still kept a mop tucked away in my office closet, a reminder, a symbol. Every time I felt the walls closing in, every time the pressure threatened to swallow me whole, I would take a few minutes, pull it out, and just hold it in my hands. It grounded me, reminded me of where I had come from, and more importantly, why I could never let success steal my soul. Titles are temporary. Power is fleeting. But dignity is forever. One crisp autumn morning, as I was walking through the front lobby, I noticed a young man struggling with a loaded cart of supplies. He was new, wearing the same plain gray uniform I once wore. People hurried past him, eyes glued to their phones, pretending not to see. I didn't hesitate. I crossed the marble floor, took one side of the cart, and helped him guide it toward the service elevator. His eyes widened in shock as he recognized me. "Aren't you?" he stammered, unable to finish. I just smiled. "Just someone who's been there," I said simply. That interaction sparked something bigger than I could have ever planned. Word spread through the building like wildfire, the COO helping the janitor. It wasn't a stunt. It wasn't a publicity move. It was real, and people knew it. In the weeks that followed, I noticed a subtle but profound change. Managers started slowing down to help when someone struggled. Executives started learning the names of the people who made their coffee, who emptied their trash, who made their comfortable lives possible. Respect wasn't a memo anymore, it was a living, breathing force. And I realized something beautiful: real change doesn't happen from the top down or the bottom up. It happens when people meet in the middle, when they see each other, truly see each other, and choose kindness over convenience. The mop, the office, the speeches. None of it mattered unless it made the invisible visible. Unless it made us better. And slowly, painfully, gloriously, it did. It really, truly did. As the years unfolded, I found myself becoming less obsessed with climbing higher and more focused on building wider, strengthening the foundation beneath me so that others could stand on it too. Promotions lost their glitter, awards gathered dust on shelves. What mattered to me now were the faces in the hallways, the stories carried in shy smiles and firm handshakes. I watched employees I had mentored rise into leadership roles of their own, not by cutting others down, but by lifting them up. I saw the cafeteria cashier who had once been too afraid to speak in meetings now confidently presenting quarterly strategies to the board. I saw the night security guard, the same one who once loaned me a flashlight when I was just starting out, move into corporate security management. These victories were quiet, barely making ripples in the wider corporate world. But to me, they were earthquakes, reshaping the very soul of our company. One particular moment burned itself into my memory. We had hosted a company-wide celebration after securing a major partnership that would define the next decade of our growth. As the party buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and music, I slipped away from the executives and found myself wandering into the service corridor behind the ballroom. There, cleaning up spilled trays and stacking chairs, were members of the facilities team, the invisible force that kept everything running. I grabbed a rag without a second thought and started wiping down tables beside them. At first, they stared, stunned. Then they smiled. And together, without fanfare, we cleaned. That night, one of the crew, a woman named Denise, who had just started working for us 2 months earlier, pulled me aside. Her voice shook as she spoke. "I was scared when I took this job," she admitted. "I thought it would be just like all the others, people looking through me, stepping over me. But here it's different. Because of you." I had to blink hard to keep the tears from falling. Because of me. It was overwhelming, humbling, terrifying. To know that every choice I made, every small act of kindness or failure to act, had the power to either lift someone higher or push them further down. It was a responsibility I carried with reverence. I understood now, more than ever, that leadership wasn't about control. It wasn't about power. It was about service. Every meeting I led, every policy I approved, every word I spoke in public or private, it all had to pass through one unbreakable filter. Will this honor the people who trust me to lead them? If the answer was no, then it wasn't worth doing, no matter how profitable or popular it might seem. That philosophy didn't always make me friends. There were still board members who grumbled about my sentimental ways. There were still rival companies that mocked us for caring more about people than numbers. But I didn't care. I could sleep at night knowing that I had stayed true to the promises I had made to Aaron, to my parents, to that scared young janitor I used to be. And maybe most importantly, to every person who needed someone to prove that kindness wasn't weakness. Kindness was strength. The purest, hardest kind there was. It was sometime around my 10th anniversary with Grayson Enterprises that Aaron approached me with an idea so bold, so audacious, that at first I thought he was joking. We were sitting in his office late one evening, the city glittering behind him like a field of stars, when he leaned back in his chair, studying me with that mischievous glint he always got when he was about to drop a bombshell. "Jason," he said, "what if we didn't just change this company? What if we changed the whole damn industry?" I laughed, thinking it was another one of his thought experiments, the kind we tossed around after too many late nights and too much bad coffee. But Aaron wasn't laughing. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I'm serious," he said. "What if we created a model that other corporations couldn't ignore? A system where employee growth wasn't just a slogan, but a core business strategy? Where profit and compassion weren't enemies but partners?" The enormity of it stole my breath away. For years, I had fought to build something good within these walls. But to expand that vision beyond Grayson, to infect other companies with the radical idea that people mattered, it felt like standing at the edge of a canyon, about to leap into the unknown. Still, deep in my gut, I knew this was what every step of my journey had been preparing me for. This was the next mountain. And I was ready. We spent months designing what would become the Human First Initiative, a sweeping program aimed at redefining corporate culture across industries. We partnered with educational institutions, built mentorship pipelines, offered fully funded scholarships and leadership training not just to top performers, but to janitors, cafeteria workers, mailroom clerks, anyone willing to dream and hustle. We created transparent promotion tracks, flattened hierarchies where possible, and insisted that leadership at every level be judged not just on performance metrics, but on how they treated the people under them. It was hard. God, it was hard. The resistance was fierce. There were lawsuits, smear campaigns, whisper networks of competitors predicting our failure. Old systems don't die quietly, they claw and bite and scream. But we held the line. We fought not just with policies, but with stories, real stories of real people whose lives had been changed when they were seen, heard, and valued. We put faces to the numbers, humanity to the margins. And slowly, the world started to notice. Publications that once dismissed us as naive started calling our results the future of business. Employees across the country demanded similar programs at their own companies. Competitors who mocked us were forced to imitate us just to survive. We hadn't just created a better workplace. We had ignited a movement. Through it all, I never let myself forget the truth. None of this would exist if not for a dropped cup of coffee, a hurried act of kindness, a willingness to help without expecting anything in return. That tiny moment, invisible to almost everyone else, had started a fire big enough to change the world. It was humbling, terrifying, beautiful beyond words. And it was only just beginning. With the Human First Initiative fully launched and spreading faster than any of us had dared to dream, I found myself in a strange, reflective phase of life. Success didn't taste the way I once thought it would. It wasn't some fireworks show of glory or a tidal wave of endless applause. It was quieter, deeper, like a steady flame that burned within your chest, warming you from the inside out. I spent more and more time traveling to different branches, sitting down with employees at every level, listening to their stories, their frustrations, their hopes. It amazed me how many brilliant, hard-working people had spent years, sometimes decades, thinking no one would ever see them. It amazed me even more how quickly they could blossom when someone simply believed they mattered. In those long conversations over cafeteria tables and folding chairs, I started to understand something profound. Leadership wasn't about commanding people, it was about believing in them louder than they believed in themselves. It was about holding up a mirror and showing them the strength, the resilience, the beauty they had forgotten or never known was there. And sometimes that was all it took to change everything. Meanwhile, my own life had settled into something I had never truly allowed myself to hope for, a steady, unshakable peace. I bought a small house on the edge of the city, nothing extravagant, just a cozy place with a big porch and enough room for friends and family to gather. I spent weekends helping with community projects, volunteering at shelters, mentoring young people who reminded me so much of myself. It wasn't about giving back, that phrase always sounded hollow to me. It was about continuing forward, pulling others up just as I had been pulled, refusing to let the ladder be yanked away once I had climbed it. But there were still moments of doubt. Late at night, when the world was quiet and my mind wandered back to the boy scrubbing toilets and dreaming of escape, I would wonder if it could all disappear. If some unseen hand would suddenly slam the door shut again, reminding me that people like me weren't meant for rooms like these. Old fears don't vanish, they just grow quieter, lurking in the dark corners of your heart. It was during one of those restless nights that I found myself digging through an old box in my closet filled with relics from my past, faded uniforms, name tags, a battered mop handle I couldn't bear to throw away. At the bottom of the box, I found an old, crumpled piece of notebook paper. It was a list I had written years ago, back when I was still living in that tiny studio apartment. A list of dreams so fragile I had never dared to show them to anyone. Own a car that starts every time. Have my own office. Be respected. Help someone else rise. Never forget who I am. I traced the faded ink with my fingers, tears pricking my eyes. I had done it. Not perfectly. Not without mistakes. But honestly. Fully. Heart first, every step of the way. And I knew, with a certainty so deep it anchored me against every future storm, whatever else life had in store, I would be ready. Because once you've climbed out of the dark, once you've carried others with you into the light, there's no force on earth strong enough to drag you back down. Not anymore. Never again. The end of one journey often marks the beginning of another, though it rarely feels that way at first. I didn't realize it then, but the seeds I had planted in every conversation, every promotion, every second chance offered had grown into a forest so vast I could no longer see all its edges. The Human First Initiative became a blueprint not just for our company but for dozens of others who modeled themselves after what we built. Articles were written. Case studies published. I was asked to speak at conferences around the country not as some overnight sensation but as proof that slow, stubborn kindness could outlast cynicism. Every time I stood at a podium and saw rows of eager, hungry faces staring back at me, I remembered the janitor's closet I once hid in during lunch breaks, ashamed of how small my life had felt. One evening, after a long speaking tour that took me from Seattle to Miami, I returned home and found a letter waiting for me. Not an email, not a printed memo, a real letter handwritten in shaky cursive on lined paper. It was from a man named Leo, a former janitor at one of our Midwest branches. He had been through the training programs we launched, earned his business degree at night while raising 2 kids, and had just been promoted to regional operations director. His words weren't polished or fancy. They were raw, honest, full of the kind of gratitude that couldn't be faked. You showed me it was possible, Leo wrote. You showed me I mattered before I even knew how to believe it myself. I sat there at my kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, and realized that the most important thing I would ever do in this life wasn't building systems or running companies. It was simply seeing people. Choosing to see them. Choosing to believe in them. Choosing to be the bridge between the life they knew and the life they dared to imagine. Later that night, as the sky darkened into a velvet blanket studded with stars, I stood barefoot on my porch, feeling the cool wind kiss my skin. I thought about the long, messy road that had brought me here, the betrayals, the failures, the moments when I almost gave up. I thought about Aaron Grayson, who had thrown me a lifeline when I was drowning and taught me that leadership meant service, not power. I thought about my parents, who had worked themselves to the bone for a son they prayed would have a better life. And I thought about every janitor, every cafeteria worker, every security guard still out there in the quiet hours of the night, dreaming of something more. For them, I vowed I would keep fighting. Keep believing. Keep building. Because at the end of the day, when the titles are stripped away, when the accolades fade into memory, all that will remain is the impact we left behind. And I intended to leave a mark not in marble or gold, but in hearts. Real. Unbreakable. Eternal. Years later, when I finally decided to step down from my role as COO, it wasn't because I was tired, or burned out, or disillusioned. It was because I knew deep in my bones that true leadership means knowing when to pass the torch. I didn't want to cling to power until it crumbled in my hands. I wanted to leave at the peak, with my soul intact and the legacy stronger than ever. When I made the announcement at a company-wide gathering, standing under the bright white lights that once would have terrified me, There were no grand speeches, no manufactured drama. Just me, speaking from the heart the same way I always had. I told them the truth. That leadership was never about being in charge. It was about caring enough to leave something behind that could outlive you. In the months that followed, I watched as the seeds we had planted continued to bloom without me having to water them. Leaders I had mentored stepped up, carried the mission forward, refined it, made it even better. The Human First initiative expanded internationally. Stories of janitors becoming managers, of cafeteria workers rising to directors, kept rolling in like tides that would never stop. And every time I heard one of those stories, a part of my heart healed a little more. I spent more time with my parents, taking them on trips they had only ever dreamed of. I invested in community programs, built mentorship scholarships under Aaron's name, a tribute to the man who had once seen a scared, tired janitor and decided he was worth saving. I found peace in the little things. Morning coffee on my porch, neighborhood barbecues, coaching little league, watching the world spin on without the desperate need to constantly prove my worth. Because I had already proven it, not to the world but to myself. One crisp fall afternoon, sitting on a worn wooden bench overlooking the city skyline, I met a young man who had just started as a cleaner in one of the buildings we had once fought to change. He recognized me, they all did somehow, and asked for advice. He looked nervous, like he wasn't sure he deserved to be asking. Like he didn't quite believe he could ever be more than a pair of invisible hands pushing a mop across marble floors. I smiled, recognizing the fear, the hope, the fire burning quietly behind his uncertain eyes. "Don't wait for someone to tell you you're worthy," I said. "You already are. Walk like you belong in every room you enter. Help others without keeping score. Stay humble when you win. Stay kind when you lose. And whatever happens, never forget who you are." He nodded, his face serious in the golden light of the setting sun, and I knew, absolutely knew, that another journey had just begun. Not mine this time, theirs. And that, I realized with a full and quiet heart, was the true measure of a life well lived. Not the size of your office, not the number on your paycheck, not the awards gathering dust on your shelves, but the people you lift, the dreams you awaken, the hope you leave burning in the places you once stood. I rose from the bench, the city sprawling before me, the future unwritten and endless. And with a heart heavier and lighter than it had ever been, I walked forward into the fading light, knowing I had never really left anything behind. I had only made room for more, and it was enough. It was more than enough.